In the first and second days of training, you learned how to request data from the server to use in your application. In this video, you will learn how to send data to the server using the Flex RemoteObject component. You will also handle the confirmation message from the server that returns the record ID for the data that was inserted into the database. In this Flex in a Week training, I am assuming that you are watching the videos in order, which means that you have already watched the introduction to the HTTP service component video on this third day of training. If you have not, you might want to consider watching the first 4.5 minutes of that video. In that section, I orient you to the topics you have learned that prepare you for sending this data to the server. If you watch the web service component video, also on this third day of training, then you will find many similarities with RemoteObject. In this video, I will use the RemoteObject component to send the form data as a parameter to the server. When I submit this form, the confirmation message displays the ID for the record that was inserted into the database. In the declarations block of this starter file, I already have one RemoteObject component instance. I'm creating a second RemoteObject instance to send the data back to the server. I am giving it an ID property with the value of vehicle service. I'm adding a destination property with a value of cold fusion. You learned on day 2 that the destination value is configured in a configuration file on the remoting server. For a cold fusion server, the value is cold fusion. Remember that although we are using a cold fusion server for this training series, you can use any backend technology like Java, JSP, .NET, or PHP that has an AMF-compatible server. I'm adding a source property with the value of f45iaw100.remote-data.vehicle-request-data. This dot notation path points to the Cold Fusion CFC that will accept the data. I'm adding an endpoint property with the value of this URL. This property is not necessary if your Flex application is on the same server as the remote service. Since this Flex application is local and pointing to a remote service, we need to define this endpoint. Lastly, I'm adding a result event and using Flash Builder to generate the result handler. Now I'm opening the vehicle request.as file from the value objects package. Above the vehicle request class definition, I am typing an open bracket REM and then invoking the Content Assist tool to insert the remote class metadata tag in my code. I'm placing my cursor inside the closing bracket of the remote class tag and typing an open parentheses. I'm pressing Control Space and the alias property is added to my code. I'm changing the value of the alias property to f45iaw100.remote-data.vehicle-request. This will map the vehicle request value object to this Java object on the Cold Fusion server. I'm saving the file. The two ways to pass arguments to the server-side method calls through RemoteObject are parameter binding and explicit parameters. Parameter binding allows developers to predefine the source data for arguments that will be passed to the server-side methods. This technique is only available if you use the RemoteObject MXML tag. You nest an arguments MXML tag within the method MXML tags of the RemoteObject tag block. All arguments are placed in ordinal position, not by name. To call a method and pass the defined values, use the RemoteObject class's send method. When using explicit parameters, you add the arguments to the method call in the same order that they are defined in the server-side method. Note that the argument is defined as an object name value pair. This is the way that I will send the data to the server for the employee portal vehicle request form. I have debugged the application so that you can see the vehicle request data value object in the event object that is passed from the custom component. I am stopping the debugging session and returning to the Flash perspective. In the event handler for the custom component event, I am deleting the alert.show method and adding the vehicle service.add vehicle request method to send the data to the server. This method is expecting the data object and I am passing it event.vehicle request data. I'm saving the file. I'm enabling the network monitor, maximizing the view, and then running the application. You can see that the first remote service call retrieves the data for display in the drop-down list control. I'm filling out everything on the form except for the mobile phone number field, and then submitting the form. I receive a runtime error. Back in Flash Builder, you can see that the second service request shows an error. This is because the mobile phone number field is required. I'm minimizing the network monitor view and returning to my code. Now I'm going to add a fault handler to show an alert message when the mobile phone field is left blank. To the vehicle service remote object, I am adding a fault event and using the content assist tool to generate the fault handler. I'm locating the generated fault handler and removing the generated code stub. Within the function, I'm adding the alert.show method to display the event.fault.fault string as the text in the alert pop-up. I'm also giving it a title of fault information for add vehicle request. I'm saving the file and running the application. Now when I fill out the form without the mobile phone number field, I see an alert message. I want to display an alert message with the record ID when the data is returned from the server. So in the result handler, I'm typing if and then pressing Control space twice to show code templates in the Content Assist tool. I'm selecting the template for the if statement. I'm setting the conditional statement to evaluate the event.result.id value. Within the if statement, I'm adding an alert.show method that states the request was submitted, the record ID is, and then concatenating the event.result.id value. I'm saving the file and running the application, and then filling out the form. When I submit the form, you can see that the record ID for the inserted data is successfully returned. For your next step, work through the exercise titled Passing Data to the Server with the RemoteObject class.